At 2:15 a.m. on March 18, 1945, Private Jack Mercer crouched in the darkness 40 yards from Stalag Duitast's eastern perimeter fence. A throwing knife balanced in his calloused hand. 8 German guards stood between him and 23 Allied prisoners scheduled for execution at dawn. Command had called the rescue impossible. The approach required absolute silence. One sound meant death for everyone. In the next 4 hours, Mercer would eliminate those 8 guards using nothing but 6 throwing knives and a technique the Army called obsolete, freeing every condemned man without firing a single shot. The wind cut across the frozen German countryside, carrying the smell of coal smoke from the guard towers. Mercer's breath formed small clouds in the March cold as he studied the guard rotation pattern he'd memorized. The nearest sentry stood 38 yards away, rifle slung over his shoulder, stamping his feet against the cold. Behind him, 7 more guards maintained their posts around the isolation barracks where the condemned prisoners waited. Mercer shifted his weight, feeling the 3 additional knives strapped to his thigh. His fingers traced the familiar balance point of the blade in his hand, a skill learned not in basic training, but in the slaughterhouses of Chicago's Union stockyards, where he'd spent 5 years before the war throwing boning knives into wooden targets during lunch breaks. The Army had laughed at his request to bring throwing knives into combat. They'd laughed less when he'd demonstrated by sinking 6 blades into targets at 50 feet during training. Now those knives represented the only chance 23 men had of seeing another sunrise. Jack Mercer grew up in Chicago's Packingtown district, where the stench of the stockyards drifted through apartment windows and men measured their lives in shifts at the killing floors. His father had worked the cattle pens for 30 years before a goring put him on permanent disability. Jack started at Swift & Company at 16, learning to handle a knife before most boys learned to shave. The meat packing plants taught precision. Every cut had to be exact. Waste meant money lost. Speed meant quotas met. Jack worked the boning line, separating meat from carcasses with knives that needed to be sharp enough to slice through cartilage, but controlled enough not to ruin the cut. During the 15-minute lunch breaks, workers would throw knives at wooden posts for money. Jack developed his technique there, learning to read distance, account for wind, adjust for the knife's spin. He was 23 when Pearl Harbor happened. The draft notice came 3 weeks later. At Fort Benning, his knife skills became a source of entertainment for his platoon. The sergeant had watched him demonstrate once, then shook his head. "Mercer, we got rifles for killing Germans. Save the circus act for the USO shows." But Jack kept practicing, kept the knives sharp, kept calculating distances and rotations. His platoon called him Blade and placed bets on his accuracy. The 69th Infantry Division shipped to Europe in November 1944. They pushed through France, then into Germany, as winter settled across the Rhineland. Jack carried his throwing knives in a custom leather bandolier he'd paid a Belgian cobbler to make. 6 knives, each 12 inches long, weighted and balanced for his throwing style. His squad joked about them. His lieutenant tolerated them. His captain thought they were ridiculous. On March 15, 1945, everything changed. The 69th Infantry had liberated Stalag Duitast 3 days earlier, freeing over 800 Allied prisoners from the camp near Wiesbaden. But intelligence discovered that 23 prisoners, American and British soldiers who'd attempted escape or were suspected of sabotage, had been moved to an isolation compound 5 miles east. The SS planned to execute them before Allied forces could arrive. Captain Morrison gathered the company. "We've got 23 men in an SS holding facility. They're scheduled for execution at dawn, March 18th. The compound is small, 1 barracks, 8 guards, surrounded by open farmland. We can't assault it without killing everyone inside. He spread a map across his field desk. We need someone who can get in silent, neutralize the guards without gunfire, and extract those prisoners before the SS realizes what's happening. The room stayed silent. Everyone understood what Morrison was proposing. A lone soldier approaching across open ground, dealing with 8 armed guards, freeing 24 prisoners, and escaping, all without raising an alarm. The odds of success approached 0. "I'll go," Jack said. Morrison looked at him. "Mercer, this isn't a volunteer mission. This is suicide with extra steps. Those knives you all laugh about?" Jack stood. "I can drop a target at 50 feet without making a sound. I've done it hunting deer back home. Done it in practice 1,000 times. 8 guards, spaced out, working a rotation pattern. I can do this." The lieutenant spoke up. "Jack, throwing knives against armed sentries? You'd need perfect accuracy, perfect timing, perfect silence. One miss, and everyone dies." "I know," Jack's voice stayed level. "But those men are dead anyway if we don't try. I've been killing things with knives since I was 16. I know what I'm doing." Morrison studied him for a long moment. 3 reconnaissance photos lay on the desk, showing the compound layout. 8 guards visible in rotation. 23 prisoners confirmed inside the barracks. Execution scheduled for 6:00 a.m., less than 50 hours away. "Intelligence gives this a 5% success rate," Morrison said. "That's being generous. You miss once, you're dead. You make noise, prisoners are dead. Guard changes early, everyone's dead." "Understood, sir." "Why are you doing this, Mercer?" Jack thought of the photographs he'd seen from other liberated camps. The skeletal prisoners, the mass graves, the systematic extermination. He thought of his platoon's medic, Thompson, captured during the Bulge. They didn't know which camp held him, but every camp they liberated might be the one. "Someone has to, sir, and I'm the only one who can do it silent." Morrison approved the mission with one condition. Jack would have 48 hours to study the compound layout, guard patterns, and approach routes. Intelligence would provide detailed reconnaissance. If conditions weren't perfect, if guard strength increased, if prisoner count changed, if weather compromised the approach, the mission would abort. For 2 days, Jack studied everything. Aerial photographs showed the compound sat in a cleared area surrounded by farmland. The nearest cover stood 200 yards away, a small copse of trees where he could stage. From there, open ground to the fence line. 8 guards maintained rotating posts, 2 on the barracks itself, 2 at the compound entrance, 4 walking patrol circuits. He practiced with his knives until his throwing arm ached. 50 feet, 60 feet, 70 feet in high wind. He memorized the exact moment of release, the number of rotations, the point of impact. Each knife had to strike fatal, throat, heart, eye socket, because wounded guards could scream. The night before the mission, Morrison found him cleaning his knives by lamplight. Intelligence confirms the execution is scheduled for 6 a.m. tomorrow. You'll insert at 2 a.m. That gives you 4 hours to neutralize guards, free prisoners, and reach our lines. 4 hours is plenty, sir. Jack, I have to ask one more time. Are you certain about this? Those men are counting on someone, Captain. Might as well be me. Morrison handed him a folded paper. Write to your family. Just in case. Jack wrote 3 sentences to his mother, sealed the envelope, and handed it back. At 11 p.m., he gathered his gear, 6 throwing knives in his bandolier, wire cutters for the fence, dark clothing treated with mud to kill any shine, a compass, one canteen of water. No rifle, no grenades, nothing that could make noise if dropped. The chaplain stopped by. Jack declined prayer, but accepted a handshake. His squad wished him luck with the same careful tone people use at funerals. At midnight, a jeep drove him to the staging area. At 1:45 a.m., Jack lay in the tree line, watching the compound through darkness. The March cold had dropped to near freezing. His breath came slow and controlled as he studied the guard patterns one final time. Intelligence had been accurate. 8 guards, rotating positions every 30 minutes. 2 stood near the barracks entrance. 2 manned the compound gate. 4 walked patrol circuits around the perimeter. He checked his knives for the dozenth time. Each blade balanced perfectly in his hand. Each edge sharp enough to shave with. Each weighted to complete exactly 2.5 rotations at 50 feet. He'd marked his throwing positions with mental notes. That fence post was 45 feet. That corner was 60. That guard tower was 70. At 2:00 a.m., he began his approach. The ground was frozen hard, making crawling difficult. Each movement had to be calculated. Slide forward on elbows, pause, scan for reaction, advance again. The farmland offered no cover except darkness and a shallow irrigation ditch that ran roughly toward the compound. Jack used it, even though freezing water soaked through his uniform. The smell of mud mixed with distant coal smoke from the guard stations. His fingers went numb in the first 15 minutes. He paused twice to flex them, restoring circulation and grip strength. Without feeling in his hands, he couldn't throw accurately. Without accuracy, everyone died. 200 yards took him an hour. He moved in the intervals between guard rotations, freezing completely still when footsteps approached. Once, a guard stopped less than 30 feet away to light a cigarette. Jack pressed himself into the frozen earth, controlling his breathing, watching the cherry glow of tobacco. The guard finished his smoke, flicked the butt away, and moved on. At 3:15 a.m., Jack reached his first throwing position, a slight rise in the ground, 48 feet from the nearest guard. The sentry stood near the compound's southeast corner, rifle slung, blowing on his hands for warmth. Behind him, Jack could see the barracks, where the prisoners waited. No lights showed inside. The execution was scheduled in less than 3 hours. Jack drew his first knife. The blade felt cold and heavy in his numb fingers. He flexed his hand twice, forcing blood back into his fingertips. The guard shifted position, turning slightly. Jack waited. Throwing at a moving target from 48 feet required perfect timing. The knife would take roughly 1 second to reach its target, enough time for the guard to move if he chose wrong. The guard settled into stillness, facing away from Jack's position. This was the moment. Jack rose into a crouch. He felt the knife's balance point, adjusted his grip one final time, and calculated distance, wind, rotation. His arm came back. The motion was automatic after thousands of practice throws. Weight shift, arm extension, wrist snap, release. The knife turned twice in the air. It struck the guard just below the base of his skull, severing the spinal column. The man dropped without a sound, crumpling to the frozen ground. Jack was moving before the body settled, crossing the distance in 6 seconds, catching the falling rifle before it clattered. Jack dragged the body into shadows near the compound fence. 1 down, 7 to go. He retrieved his knife, wiping the blade clean on the dead guard's uniform. The man had been young, maybe 20, with a photograph of a girl tucked into his jacket pocket. Jack looked away and focused on the next target. Guard number 2 walked a patrol route along the western fence line. Jack tracked his movement from behind a supply shed. The sentry maintained a steady pace, rifle at port arms, boots crunching on frozen ground. 52 feet away. The distance gave Jack a 3-second window. When the guard passed behind a wooden post that would conceal his body's fall, Jack waited for the pattern to repeat. The guard reached the post. Jack threw. The knife caught him in the throat. The man's hands went to his neck, eyes wide, but no sound emerged except a wet gurgle. He dropped behind the post. Jack crossed the distance, pulled him fully behind cover, retrieved his knife. 2 down, 6 remaining. The next guard presented a problem. He stood at the compound gate with another sentry, both men visible to each other. Killing one would alert the other immediately, unless Jack could drop them simultaneously. He studied the problem. 2 men, 15 feet apart, both facing the interior of the compound. Throwing at one would require repositioning for the second, creating a delay of at least 3 seconds. Too long. Jack circled the compound perimeter, staying in shadows, until he found a new angle. From the northeast corner, both guards were visible in profile, separated by 18 feet. If he moved to a position exactly between them, he could reduce the repositioning time. It would require throwing from 65 feet, longer than he'd ever attempted in combat. He positioned himself carefully, 2 knives in hand now. The guards talked quietly in German. Jack caught fragments about the cold, about going home, about the war ending. Neither man seemed alert. They expected no trouble in the middle of the night, miles from the front lines. Jack took a deep breath. The first guard would be easy, a clear shot to the chest from 65 feet. The second guard would hear the first body fall. Jack would have perhaps 2 seconds before the man reacted. He needed to throw both knives in sequence, trusting the first would drop his target silently enough that the second wouldn't comprehend what happened. He threw the first knife. It covered 65 feet in 1.2 seconds, striking the guard in the chest just left of center. The man gasped, stumbled backward, began to fall. Jack was already releasing the second knife. It caught the second guard in the throat as he turned toward the sound of his companion's collapse. Both men went down within 3 seconds of each other. Jack sprinted to them, breathing hard. 4 down, 4 to go. But now he had a problem. 2 bodies near the main gate, visible to anyone who looked that direction. He had maybe 10 minutes before the next guard rotation brought someone to this position. He dragged both bodies behind the guardhouse, working quickly despite the exertion. Sweat froze on his face in the March cold. His throwing arm ached. He had 3 knives remaining and 4 guards to eliminate. The next guard walked a patrol between the barracks and the eastern fence. Jack tracked him from beside a water barrel, calculating the approach. 40 feet away, moving in a predictable pattern. Jack waited until the man's back was turned, then threw. The knife struck between the shoulder blades. The guard stumbled, made a strangled sound, fell forward. Jack was on him in seconds, clamping a hand over the man's mouth until the struggling ceased. 5 down, 3 guards left, 2 knives remaining. Jack retrieved his knife and assessed the situation. The 2 barracks guards stood near the entrance where the prisoners were held. The final guard walked a wide patrol circuit around the entire compound. Jack needed to eliminate the roving guard first, then deal with the 2 stationary guards. But he was down to 2 knives, and 3 men remained. He made his decision. He'd eliminate the patrol guard with a knife, then take his rifle and use it as a club for the final 2 guards. Gunfire would alert nearby units, but a rifle butt to the skull would be silent enough if executed properly. Jack positioned himself along the patrol route. The guard approached, rifle at the ready, more alert than the others had been. Perhaps he'd noticed his companions weren't reporting in. Perhaps he simply had better instincts. Either way, Jack needed to drop him quickly. 50 feet, 45 feet, 40 feet. Jack waited until the guard's attention focused on the barracks, then threw his second-to-last knife. It struck the guard in the side of the neck, severing the carotid artery. Blood sprayed across frozen ground. The man clawed at his throat, stumbling sideways, but made no sound except a wet choking. He collapsed near the fence line. 6 down, 2 remaining. 1 knife left. Jack picked up the dead guard's rifle, checked that it wasn't loaded. It was, and ejected the rounds silently. A loaded rifle created too much temptation to fire. He needed this to stay silent. The 2 remaining guards stood 30 feet apart near the barracks entrance. Both faced the door, alert but not alarmed. Jack studied them from behind a stack of firewood 40 feet away. He had 1 knife and 1 rifle. 2 targets. The knife could drop one silently, but the second guard would hear the first man fall. Jack needed to close the distance fast enough to reach the second guard before he could react or shout. The setup required precision. He'd throw the knife at the guard on the left, then sprint the 40 feet in roughly 4 seconds, reaching the second guard before he fully processed what happened. It was risky. The second guard could shout, could fire his weapon, could alert the entire area, but Jack had no other option. He gripped his final knife. His throwing arm was exhausted, muscles trembling from the cold and repeated use. He flexed his fingers, forcing steadiness into his hand. The guard on the left stood in profile, offering a clear target. Jack measured the distance one final time, adjusted for a slight crosswind, and threw. The knife struck the guard in the temple. He dropped instantly. Jack was already running, boots pounding frozen ground, rifle raised. The second guard turned, mouth opening to shout, hand reaching for his weapon. Jack covered the final 10 feet in 2 seconds and swung the rifle like a baseball bat. The stock connected with the guard's jaw. Bone cracked. The man went down hard. Jack stood over him, breathing hard, rifle ready to strike again. The guard didn't move. 8 guards down. 23 prisoners waited inside the barracks. Jack tried the barracks door. Locked. He checked the fallen guards for keys, found them on the second body, and unlocked the door. Inside, 23 men stared at him from the darkness. American and British soldiers, emaciated, some injured, all exhausted. They'd been awake, waiting for dawn and execution. "I'm Private Jack Mercer, 69th Infantry," he whispered. "We're leaving. Now. Stay quiet and stay together." A British lieutenant spoke first. "The guards." "Dead. All 8. We've got maybe 20 minutes before someone notices they're not reporting in. Can everyone walk?" 3 men couldn't. Malnutrition and beatings had left them too weak. Jack assessed the situation quickly. The nearest Allied lines were 3 miles west. 4 men could carry the weakest 3. They'd move slower, but everyone would move. "Pair up. Strong men carry the weak. We head west across the farmland. No talking, no stopping unless I signal. If we encounter patrols, you drop and stay down. Understood?" 23 heads nodded. Jack led them out into the night. The first quarter mile passed smoothly. The freed prisoners moved in near silence, boots careful on frozen ground. Jack led them away from roads, across open farmland, using the darkness and his compass bearing to navigate. The March cold bit through thin prison uniforms. Several men were shivering violently within minutes. At 4:30 a.m., searchlights erupted behind them. Sirens wailed from the compound. Someone had discovered the bodies. Jack heard shouting in German. Then the sound of vehicles starting. "Move faster," he ordered. "They know we're gone." The column picked up pace. Men who'd been struggling to walk suddenly found energy born of fear. The three who couldn't walk were carried by stronger prisoners, rotated every few minutes to distribute the burden. Jack pushed them hard across a frozen creek, through a small woodlot, across another field. Behind them, vehicle lights swept across the countryside. German voices shouted orders. Dogs barked. The pursuit was organized and close. Jack found a ravine, a drainage ditch about 6 feet deep that ran roughly west. "Down there, everyone down. Stay low and keep moving." The prisoners slid into the ravine. It offered concealment and a clear route away from the search pattern. They moved through the ditch in single file, boots splashing through icy water, hands braced against dirt walls. A bullet cracked overhead, then another. The Germans had spotted their trail. Jack pushed the column forward, maintaining discipline despite the fear. "Keep moving! Don't stop! Don't look back!" The ravine ended abruptly at a small road. Jack risked a glance back. Vehicle lights were perhaps 400 yards behind, closing fast. Across the road, a pine forest offered cover. They had to cross 40 yards of open ground in full view of their pursuers. "Run! Everyone run! Get to the trees!" 23 prisoners sprinted across the road. Jack stayed behind, watching their backs, counting heads. One man fell halfway across. Jack grabbed him, hauled him up, pushed him forward. The tree line was 20 yards away. 10 yards, 5 yards. Machine gun fire tore through the air. Bullets struck trees, spraying bark and splinters. Jack dove into the forest as rounds snapped past his head. He rolled, came up, grabbed the nearest prisoner, and pulled him deeper into cover. "Count off," he ordered. The British lieutenant moved down the line, checking each man. 23, all present." They moved through the pine forest at a stumbling run. The trees offered concealment, but the Germans were close behind, moving with dogs and flashlights. Jack led them deeper into the woods, away from obvious trails, using the darkness and dense undergrowth to break up their silhouette. At 5:15 a.m., they reached a small river. Jack recognized it from his briefing maps, the boundary between German-held territory and the American advance positions. Allied lines were on the far side, but the river was 40 feet wide, running fast with snowmelt, and none of the prisoners were strong enough to swim in their condition. Jack searched the riverbank. A fallen tree bridged part of the gap. Not ideal, but usable. Across the log, one at a time, steady and slow. The British lieutenant went first, balancing carefully on the slick wood. He made it across, turned, helped the next man. One by one, the prisoners crossed. The sounds of pursuit grew closer. Dogs barking, men shouting, vehicles on nearby roads. The last prisoner was halfway across when German soldiers emerged from the tree line. An officer shouted for them to halt. Jack grabbed a fallen branch and threw it at the closest soldier, creating a second of confusion. "Go! Move!" The last prisoner scrambled across. Jack jumped onto the log, arms spread for balance. Gunfire erupted behind him. Bullets struck the water. He ran the final 10 feet and dove off the log onto the far bank. American voices shouted from defensive positions ahead. "Identify yourselves!" Private Mercer, 69th Infantry, with 23 freed prisoners. "Get your asses over here! We've got you covered!" Jack and the freed prisoners stumbled into American lines at 5:45 a.m. Medics rushed forward. A captain radioed the successful extraction. Behind them, German forces held their position on the far riverbank but didn't cross. The prisoners collapsed in groups, some crying, some silent, all alive. Jack sat against a tree, his throwing arm hanging limp. He'd used the last of his adrenaline getting them across that river. Captain Morrison appeared 20 minutes later in a jeep. He looked at the 23 men receiving medical attention, then at Jack. "Mercer, intelligence said you had a 5% chance." "Guess I got lucky, sir." "Lucky?" Morrison shook his head. "Son, you just did the impossible. 8 guards, 8 knives, 23 prisoners extracted without a shot fired. That's not luck. That's skill." The debriefing took 3 hours. Jack recounted every detail. The approach, each guard eliminated. The extraction, the pursuit, the crossing. Intelligence officers took notes. The British lieutenant corroborated everything. He dropped those guards like they weren't even there. Silent, efficient, professional, never seen anything like it. A medic examined the 3 prisoners who'd been too weak to walk. Severe malnutrition, multiple contusions, possible internal injuries. They wouldn't have survived execution. Hell, they might not have survived another week of captivity. The after-action report, dated March 19, 1945, documented the mission's success. 8 enemy guards eliminated without firearms. 23 prisoners freed without casualties. Mission accomplished within 4-hour window. Recommended for Distinguished Service Cross. The recommendation moved up the chain of command. Witness statements came from all 23 freed prisoners. Physical evidence included Jack's throwing knives, recovered from the compound, and German radio intercepts describing the incident as a silent attack by unknown forces. The Distinguished Service Cross citation arrived 6 weeks later. Captain Morrison read it aloud to the assembled company. For extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy, Private John Mercer voluntarily undertook a mission of extreme danger, demonstrating exceptional skill, courage, and devotion to duty. Jack stood at attention during the reading. His platoon, the men who'd joked about his throwing knives for months, stood silent. When Morrison pinned the medal to his uniform, the entire company saluted. The freed prisoners wrote letters. An American sergeant from Ohio. Private Mercer saved my life with a throwing knife. I saw him drop those guards, never missed once. A British corporal from Manchester. We'd accepted our execution. Then this Yank appears like a ghost and kills 8 guards with knives. Thought I was hallucinating. The mission inspired similar attempts by other units. Special operations groups began training soldiers in silent elimination techniques. Success rates improved. The Wehrmacht increased guard strength at holding facilities. But Jack's mission remained the standard. 8 guards, 0 casualties, perfect execution. Jack Mercer returned to Chicago in November 1945. He went back to Swift and Company, back to the boning lines, back to a life measured in shifts and paychecks. He married a girl from Bridgeport. They had 3 children. He rarely mentioned the war. His old platoon held reunions every 5 years. Jack attended most of them. Men would ask him to tell the knife story. He'd deflect, talk about the freed prisoners instead, ask about their families. Those 23 men deserved to go home. I just opened the door. Several of the freed prisoners stayed in contact. Christmas cards came from Ohio, Manchester, Boston, Virginia. In 1967, 12 of them attended a reunion in Washington. Jack flew out to meet them. They shared dinner, told stories, laughed about survival. A photograph from that dinner shows Jack surrounded by older men, all smiling, all alive. Jack worked at the stockyards until 1973, when the plants closed. He took a job teaching shop class at a high school, stayed there until retirement. His students sometimes asked about the medal in his desk drawer. He'd show them, explain what it meant, tell them it represented 23 men who got to go home. He died in 1994, at age 73, of heart failure, at home in Chicago. His funeral drew 200 people. 8 of the freed prisoners attended, old men themselves now, but they came. They formed an honor guard at his casket. The British lieutenant, now 81, spoke at the service. Jack Mercer showed me what one man can do when he refuses to accept impossible odds. He saved my life with a throwing knife in the middle of the night. I've been grateful every day since. Jack was buried with military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. His medals were donated to the Army Infantry Museum. His throwing knives, the 6 blades he'd carried through the war, were given to his children. One hangs in a case at Fort Benning, displayed with a plaque describing the mission. The knife shows signs of use, the edge honed sharp by countless practice throws in Chicago stockyards and Georgia training grounds. Of the 23 freed prisoners, all survived the war. 4 returned to military service. 19 went home. They lived ordinary lives, working jobs, raising families, growing old. But every March 18th, those who were able would call each other, remembering the night a meat packer from Chicago appeared in the darkness with throwing knives and impossible courage. Military historians studying special operations during World War II cite Jack's mission as an example of unconventional warfare done right. The German after-action reports described the compound attack as precise and professional. Modern Special Forces training includes case studies of the mission, analyzing the planning, execution, and extraction. The mission demonstrated that old skills could be adapted for modern warfare, that sometimes the right tool wasn't the most advanced weapon, but the one matched perfectly to the operator's expertise. That one determined soldier, with absolute mastery of his craft, could accomplish what seemed impossible. Jack never called himself a hero. When pressed, he'd say the real heroes were the men who'd endured captivity, who'd faced execution with dignity, who'd found strength to run when freedom appeared. He was just a guy who could throw knives accurately. The war needed that skill for one night. He provided it. 23 men lived because he did. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these stories alive.